All right, so we're going to officially get started with today's webinar. I'm sure some more people will trickle in as we get going, but thank you again to everyone who is on with us today. We have a lot to cover on this topic, so we're going to get started and so we don't take up too much of your time. So today's speakers on the webinar include myself. My name is Tracy, and I am the marketing manager at Energy Toolbase. And of course, we also have Adam Gerza on with us from the ETB team as well. Some quick notes before we start. After the webinar, this recording and the slide deck will be sent out to everybody who registered, whether they attended or not. So just be on the lookout for that. And we'll also be doing our Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. So if you do have questions, we've already had some come in. We will try to get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So I do want to quickly take a look at today's agenda because I think we've really thoughtfully put this together and narrowed down topics that will help you more accurately model storage, residential storage in the future. As you know, California's residential energy storage market is no doubt one of the largest and the fastest growing markets, and it's not slowing down. So we are really excited to be able to host this webinar and give you some real insight into projects we're seeing throughout California's 3 IOUs amidst some of the changes that have happened. All right, so obviously residential storage on homes in California hasn't always been financially motivating. Some customers look to it for several other reasons, including backup power and becoming energy independent. Now storage in homes, especially in California, has started to make more sense financially. Batteries are declining in price and more storage-friendly rates are being introduced within the past couple of years, more specifically from those 3 IOUs. So this has really led into the major growth that the energy storage market has seen this year. We put Wood Mackenzie's research from Q1 of this year on the screen. The residential sector was really hot this year. The market says nearly 150 megawatts were deployed for behind-the-meter storage, and behind-the-meter storage made up 60% of total deployments in megawatt hours. And in regard to residential growth, residential deployments grew quarter over quarter according to this research as well. So those are great numbers. And looking forward, the future of energy storage, particularly behind the meter, isn't expected to slow down. Actually, it is expected to account for 42% of deployments in megawatt terms by 2024. Again, another great number to look forward to. And this is no surprise to everybody. Year after year, California did have the top residential energy storage market. It's the hot state. Storage is happening in this state, and that's why most of the incentive money is gone, which leads us into the most recent SGIP data. All right, so the state's SGIP rebate has obviously been no doubt one of the best incentives for homeowners who are looking to install a battery with a solar system. Obviously, we all know that the bill was passed last year, SB 700, to reauthorize SGIP funds for an additional $800 million. Unfortunately, with that, there are still some hurdles to get over because the California Public Utilities Commission still needs to reauthorize the amount, which could be the full $800 million or a partial amount, which is still up in the air. And we actually just learned that the decision on the funding amount could be coming soon within the next couple of weeks. So if we look at the most recent SGIP data round, the top chart is residential and the bottom is commercial. And just to let you know, this incentive step tracker is updated daily, and we've included the link here in the PowerPoint. But the comparison between the money left between residential and commercial is quite staggering. The residential allotment for all 3 of the IOUs, PG&E, SDG&E, and SCE, is mostly gone, and it's been that way for quite a while. If you can see the chart on the top, which we pulled this morning, SDG&E and PG&E are both waitlisted for residential money, meaning that money is gone. And for SCE, we are in step 5. So it is getting close as well. And I think a good stat to point out here, just to show you how quick that money goes, if you look at PG&E's, it's already waitlisted, and that step actually just opened on July 1st of this year. So about a month ago, and it is already gone. So a takeaway here is that the money goes quick, obviously, for residential projects. Meanwhile, the bottom chart, the commercial steps are much slower. There are still big numbers and budgets available for commercial projects, but they aren't being used up. All of them are currently in step 3 still, with that step opening more than a year ago, some to closer to a year and a half ago. So with all the extra money being hopefully funded by the SB 700 extension, whatever that ends up being, all of those waitlisted projects will get that money and more money will open up. And advocates are obviously pushing and fighting for the full 800 million to get funded. And there are some discussions right now about reallocating some of the commercial money to the residential budgets. All right, so there are some rule changes coming for SGIP in 2020. And doing this webinar is actually perfect timing because as of Monday, just a couple days ago, there were some updates made to the CPUC's proposed decision on emission reduction requirements for SGIP projects. So this revised proposed decision is brand new, and we're going to go over some of the updates at a high level that the CPUC has made. This decision is actually an agenda item at the CPUC's voting meeting tomorrow. So we could know what happens by the end of the week with these requirements. Some of the big changes to highlight here are that residential customers will be required to take service on a TOU storage rate, where that on-peak time starts at 4 p.m. or later. The new proposed decision will also remove the minimum cycling requirement for a battery. And another change is the fleet level meeting every single storage project. Those reporting requirements will be every 6 months for 10 years. And I think a good thing to highlight here is that if developers do not comply, they can be suspended. So there are penalties if you don't meet these requirements, and you could lose your eligibility to apply for SGIP incentives, again, if you don't meet those requirements. So like I mentioned, there is a strong chance that this proposed decision gets voted on tomorrow, and these requirements are pretty set in stone. There's not a good chance that they're going to change. And I do want to quickly thank CALSA for a lot of this info. They really help keep us up to date on when things are happening and the new changes that are being made. So with all of that said, I do want to pass things over now to Adam Gurza, who will be taking over from here.
Great, thank you, Tracy. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, maybe just give me a confirmation, Tracy. I'm coming in okay on both my screen
Looks good.
and audio. Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, cool. Tracy already overviewed the topics I'm going to be hitting on today during my section of the webinar. So I'm just going to jump right into my material. I want to start by summarizing some analysis that we published a couple of months back. This got published in a couple of different places, including on SolarPowerWorld. And this was a really interesting case study that I spent a lot of time researching and analyzing. And you can see the title of the article, or op-ed, I guess you could call it, when solar plus storage operating in time of use arbitrage mode beats the economics of standalone solar. So this analysis really focused in on SoCal Edison's TOU-D-PRIME rate schedule. Okay, so this was a recently introduced rate that was designed specifically for residential homeowners to kind of offer a good value proposition when you're looking to add storage to your solar plus storage project. And it turns out this is truly a phenomenal rate. You got to give SCE credit here. They designed, in my opinion, I actually wrote this in the article, I think the best residential time of use arbitrage rate that I've ever seen. And I've looked at a lot of them. So let me kind of unpack the elements of the rate schedule and why that is. And you can kind of see some of those bullet points on the screen. Obviously, the first thing we think about for a storage friendly rate is a wide on-peak to off-peak differential, right? I always kind of say the wider the better. On the TOU-D-PRIME, the on-peak to off-peak summer is about 26 cents and the winter is 23 cents. So those are wide. Those are not actually off the charts wide. There are certainly some other schedules that I'm going to review shortly that are even wider. One important element you have to keep in mind is that this is truly a year-round rate. I look at this as there is definitely a strong price signal in both the summer and the winter. And I'm going to show you examples of rates where that is not necessarily the case. Very oftentimes you'll see wide differentials and wide deltas in the summer and really skinny ones in the winter. This rate offers effectively a 365-day opportunity by offering deltas both winter and summer. Additionally, it is a 7-day-a-week opportunity. Certain other time of use rate schedules, they offer up kind of a wide price differential Monday through Friday. And then weekends, in some cases, there is either no differential or a much skinnier differential. But the prime rate offers, again, I like to call it a 365-day-a-year price signal, both winter, summer, and all 7 days of the week. And this last bullet point's a really interesting one, and I'm going to kind of start here by jumping out and kind of illustrating exactly what I mean when I say that the TOU-D-PRIME rate has a perfectly aligned off-peak window for PV charging. This is a really important point. Here's the article, by the way, on SolarPowerWorld. It's also on our blog. It's also on our LinkedIn page. If you haven't read it already, please do. So let's go right into, I think it's best to look at this visually for this really to kind of pop off the page here. So I've got a project set up where we are moving and forcing the Solar Plus Storage customer here onto that TOU-D-PRIME rate. Let me jump into the demand visualization, and I'm going to kind of just hone right in on 1 week in the summer here. And let me take some of these layers off the chart. So really down here on the bottom of the screen, why don't we kind of start there? I've just got the TOU-D-PRIME energy rate. And you can see right there the 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. window. The on-peak rate is defined at 39.6 cents, almost 40 cents. The off-peak rate here in the summer, 13.6 cents, right? So that's that 26-cent winter. I'm sorry, that's that 26-cent summer differential I mentioned. Now, what's really also opportune about this rate is the fact that when you run energy storage simulations to really try to realistically estimate what the savings of a solar and storage system will be, almost all the time on the residential side when users are doing this, we encourage them to make sure you have the restriction on that says you must charge from solar. So that's what we've done here. And this kind of goes back to that third bullet point I'm trying to highlight. And the fact is this, all of the charging, as you can kind of clearly see here on this particular day, June 13th, where I'm hovering my mouse, is occurring in the off-peak period. Okay, so you're kind of charging and effectively buying at 13.5 cents. And then once we get into that 4 to 9 window, discharging back to reduce load and selling back to the grid and really capturing that differential. So let me just kind of show a comparison rate to illustrate why that's not always the case. So let me drag another one in here. Okay, this is actually another really good storage rate. It's one of the better storage rates in the state of California, the PG&E EVA rate. I'm actually going to unpack this a little bit more later, but I just want to stay narrow on that point I was making. Let me just kind of go right in, and we'll do the exact same thing. We'll just look at 1 week of data in the summer. Okay, now, the PG&E EVA rate, I think some folks misinterpret, because look where my mouse is now on the bottom, and look what the on-peak rate is. 51.8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is astronomically high. It's an incredibly high on-peak rate. And I think a lot of people will say, well, wow, 52 cents on, 13.5 cents off. My gosh, that's even a wider differential. We're in the neighborhood of 40 cents on peak to off peak. And yes, that's a true statement, but it's not relevant. And the reason why is because look at when the battery is charging. We set a restriction that said the storage must charge from solar. Well, guess what? The mid-peak rate, where my mouse is hovered here, which starts at 7 in the morning, is 28 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's not always relevant to just say, hey, how wide is the on-peak to off-peak differential? On this particular rate, it's kind of frankly irrelevant where the off-peak differential is, because guess what? All of the charging occurs effectively mid-peak. So really the differential you're capturing here is, buying at 28 and selling at 51, 52. That's the sort of math that goes into the entire 365-day simulation when we run it and we're trying to count up exactly how much money the storage system can save. Another point that I want to make while I'm here, let me toggle over to a winter month. Again, we're still on the PG&E EVA rate. And this was going off my other point I made earlier. Well, in the winter, the on-peak winter, 35.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Mid-peak winter, which like I just said, is really the only relevant rate that matters because that's where effectively all the solar charging happens, 21, 22 cents a kilowatt hour. So not nearly as wide of a differential in the winter as it is in the summer. That was my other point that I made earlier. By the way, this is very, very common. Oftentimes, summer differentials are wide, winter differentials are a lot skinnier. Last thing to just kind of wrap my thoughts on this point here, you also have to be mindful of how the utility defines the winter and the summer on that particular rate schedule. Again, I'm back on the EVA rate, and you can kind of just see over here, this is just a, actually this is one, I had another one where it was going to show an 8-month winter, 4-month summer. This is actually a 6 and 6, so this is not terribly bad. That's interesting. The ETOU8 is an 8-month winter, 4-month summer. So just another thing to be mindful of. I think oftentimes when we pop up rate schedules and we look at like, wow, big differentials, you definitely have to look into the details. And I'm going to kind of summarize momentarily what the comparison economics of solar plus storage versus solar only look like. But these 3 bullet points, which are really trying to illustrate why the TOU-D-PRIME rate is just a fantastic rate for solar plus storage economics, I wanted to kind of start by highlighting. Okay, so again, the summary of this article was that for a comparison of solar plus storage using very reasonable market rate assumptions, beat both the payback period and the internal rate of return, which I think are 2 widely used measures. The solar plus storage run beat the solar only run when you ran both of those on the TOU-D-PRIME schedule. So we got a lot of feedback on this article, which is great. Some folks kind of challenging what we said. Others actually had a pretty thorough conversation with a really senior rates person at Southern California Edison, who also ran this analysis using their internal tool, and I can confirm got very similar results to us. So we really stand behind this analysis and are very confident it was run correctly. And again, in order for this to have happened, because this is very rare, and that was kind of the highlight of this article, that solar plus storage really actually beat solar only using reasonable market rate assumptions. All 3 of these things kind of had to be present. So number 1, we have a fantastic rate schedule, the TOU-D-PRIME. Number 2, we ran this using step 4 SGIP at SCE at the time. Tracy had just actually mentioned that we're now in the step 5 category, and also taking a tax credit. And then also, of course, rapidly falling energy storage installed cost. We've had lots of conversations with installers to try to understand what market rate, total turnkey installed costs are of storage. And really all 3 of those things kind of had to be present for this statement to be true, for solar plus storage to beat solar only on this run. Now, the shortcoming of this analysis, one thing in hindsight that I think I definitely made a mistake on was this. And we've been having lots of conversations with folks in the market today. Let me slide ahead here. As we think about now, in the real world, in your everyday businesses, as your solar sales teams are out there in the field looking at projects, trying to figure out the best savings opportunities for customers, for the PV only systems, which I think all of us know is still the vast majority of projects that are getting proposed and are getting sold, solar and storage attachment rates in the residential segment are absolutely on the rise. The data Tracy showed earlier, it's undebatable that we're seeing strong demand, strong growth for storage in the residential segment. That said, as the total pie, most projects are still solar only. And to really run a real world practical comparison of what is the best solar only project for my customer versus what is the best possible savings, the best payback period, the best rate of return I can show them by adding storage, it's actually the correct way to run it would be on the solar only system. I think it's very common what we're seeing is a lot of full offset systems in the market. In many cases, folks are even oversizing a little bit on their solar system. So for instance, if a customer uses 12,000 kilowatt hours annually, there's certainly instances where the solar system is getting sized to even produce in excess of that, or at least 100% of that. When that gets run, that's going to get run on the best solar only rate. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in a minute. The best solar only rate, kind of my big kind of takeaway from this slide, is different than the best solar plus storage rate. So again, the PV only run, you're going to sell them a full size system, and you're going to do it on the time of use rate that makes the most sense for them. Separately, if you're attempting to truly optimize the solar plus storage system for your customer, you're going to do it on the best solar plus storage rate. In SoCal Edison, that is without question, that's the TOU-D-PRIME rate. I'm actually in the next slides going to tell you exactly what rate it is in each of the three utilities. We've ran a lot of bottoms-up analysis kind of looking at that. But the key takeaway here again is that the rate schedule that makes the most sense for your customer on the solar-only system is oftentimes different than the best rate schedule on the solar plus storage system. Another key point here, so actually let me just kind of tick ahead. The winner is just also, I want to kind of make it really clear, we've run lots of bottoms-up analysis across lots of different types of load profiles. And again, we think using really reasonable market rate assumptions. And I think this is not really profound. Everybody out there, I think for the most part, already knows this. But when you look at it this way, PV only definitely still wins on an economic basis. So if you're just looking at, again, payback period or return on investment or internal rate of return, if you design the best solar only system on the best rate and the best solar plus storage system on the best rate, solar only definitely still wins. And that is a true statement across all three utilities, even in Southern California Edison, where you're putting your customer on the TOU-D-PRIME rate, which is still a good rate. One other thing I really want to mention that's kind of jumping out at us as we've been running this analysis, if you're attempting to optimally size the solar plus storage system for your customer so that you optimize their payback period and you optimize their return on investment, very oftentimes what that means is you need to size down the solar. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to actually drag in another tab. Let's jump over to the SDG&E territory, and we're going to look at moving a customer onto the DRSES rate. This is the very common default time of use rate for solar customers. By the way, everything I'm showing you today is on the latest effective date rates. That's always how we like to run our analysis. Okay, so this is actually a solar only run, and I kind of want to illustrate, for those of you that are familiar with Energy Toolbase, you can kind of make sense of the bottom ribbon. Let me just kind of give you some context. We ran this scenario for a customer that uses 12,000 kilowatt hours annually. We sized them. We ran a ETB optimization in step 4. We sized them a full offset system. You can see here, it's like 99%. It turns out that was a 7.6 kW DC rated system. By the way, we ran all the solar only numbers at a $3 per watt per DC watt installed number, which I think is at least reasonable. It might be a bit higher, might be a bit lower. But the point I wanted to make here is for solar only, moving this customer to DRSES, we're very efficiently reducing their bill. This is not a typo. Before, the customer's bill was about $4,000. After on that 100% offset system. We're knocking it all the way down to 315. And as a lot of folks know, you can also view those numbers right here. So here was the, assuming they were on DR before, and here's assuming we're moving them to DR SES post-solar, right? So solar only, boy, we're really knocking out a huge portion of that bill. What I'm saying is there's only $315 left of utility bill. Going back to my point earlier, if we're really trying to make storage look financially attractive, we'd actually need to size down the solar, because simply there's nothing left to reduce. This particular schedule as it exists today, solar does a really good job, in other words, of reducing that bill, and there's just not much utility bill left for storage to come in and save. Also, you have to consider, this is actually real world math down here. Assuming $3 a watt installed, this is obviously an incredibly aggressive payback period. I think everyone would agree on the solar only run, 4.2 years, and an incredibly attractive internal rate of return. So it's difficult for sure for solar plus storage to compete here, right? That's kind of my point. In some cases, yeah, very, very hard for solar plus storage to even be equivalent on what the financial return is, the payback period, and the rate of return in comparison to the PV only, because there's some PV only cases like we just looked at where it's just an incredibly strong value prop on the solar only, on the best solar only rate. So I hope that point makes sense. I definitely want to get that out there because it's definitely a, I think, big takeaway that we're seeing today in the market. So let me just kind of scroll through some of these other pages. This is kind of neat. We actually went through and looked at all of the residential time of use rates that are in existence today in each of the 3 territories. And we're kind of singling out and saying, hey, this is the best solar plus storage rate if you're doing solar plus storage for your customer. In SCE, there are 3 eligible rate options now. By the way, these rate options are post-solar. There's actually even more time of use rate schedules. These are the 3 options that your customer has post-solar to go on to: the TOU-D 4 to 9, the 5 to 8, and the PRIME, which I've been talking about. And of course here, the PRIME is the best solar plus storage rate, as I kind of mentioned earlier. Let's look at PG&E. So PG&E today, there are effectively 3, the ETOU-A and the ETOU-B. Those are kind of the default rates that PG&E is moving folks onto, even non-solar customers. The EVA rate, which we've been talking about a lot, and I think a lot of folks have a pretty good understanding of the EVA rate, it actually just went away on the 1st of this month. The EVA rate is effectively now closed to new customers. In its place is now this new EV2 rate. And by the way, the EV2 rate is still quite attractive for solar plus storage. So if you're doing solar plus storage and you're trying to show a financial return to your customer, that's definitely where you're going to move them onto. Frankly, both the ETOU-A and the ETOU-B are not particularly good rates at all if you're trying to show savings from storage. The differentials are really pretty skinny. And maybe if I have time in a minute, I'll actually show the visualization on that. So one other, actually, why don't I just do it right now? I have it up. Perfect, that brought in the screen. So let's just jump and look at the ETOU-A. All I got to do is kind of toggle this over here. This is a summer month, 32.5 cents summer on, 25 winter. Okay, so what's that? 7 cents a differential. Look at the winter. This is really pretty interesting. And the ETOU-A is actually quite similar to the ETOU-B in this sense. So let's look at a winter where the differential is really skinny. The winter ETOU-A on peak, 21 cents a kilowatt hour, off peak 19.5 cents a kilowatt hour. There's nothing there virtually, is what I'm saying. You might have noticed this kind of little 2-pronged ramp up. The ETOU-A rate is actually a tiered time of use rate if you really kind of look in and unpack it. So there's an on-peak, off-peak differential, there's also a tier ceiling. So depending on if you're under 10 kilowatts per day times 30 for the month, if you're under 300 kilowatt hours for the month, all that usage is in the tier 1 ceiling, and then it scales up 8 cents into the tier 2. So there's a little extra complexity to that rate, but the reality is in the winter it's just still so skinny. Okay, let me jump back in and kind of finish my wrap on. And also, one last point, if this isn't on your radar already and you're in the PG&E territory, it should be. I actually just had a conversation with Brad Hevner at CALSA last night. PG&E will be moving residential customers to the ETOU-C rate. My understanding is both the A and the B are going to be going away, and the ETOU-C is going to be the new rate. It's not in effect yet. We're going to get that rate loaded in so you can model and run proposed projects on what that's going to mean, but just kind of make sure that's on your radar if you're in the PG&E territory. Okay, lastly, let me just finish up with SDG&E. 4 rates today: the DRSES, the TOU-DR, DR1, and DR2. By the way, I forgot to make this first point, and this is a super important point. I should have really kind of mentioned this before I jumped into anything. If you don't already know, for new solar customers in all of the IOU territories, you are absolutely mandatory required to go onto TOU rates post-solar now. My understanding, and this is from CALSA's, via CALSA's confirmation, you are in all places required to take service on a time of use rate post-solar. So I should hope at the very least, whether you're modeling solar-only projects or solar plus storage projects, you are modeling and showing customers what life is going to look like on a time of use rate. It is absolutely, I think, unethical and not accurate if you are still showing them math on one of the old legacy tier rates. Grandfathering, that's a separate issue for existing customers. We're talking about new customers going forward. So that's kind of a meta thought that applies across all of these. The kind of thing to be aware of here is that it sounds like on the SDG&E side, they're going to be moving folks. I think the TOU-DR goes away, and the DR1 and the DR2 are their longer term rates that will be moving folks onto. This is what exists today, and that's where the puck is going, again, according to Brad at CALSA. The SDG&E rates are really interesting. Maybe this will be the last thing I show when I jump over here. Any one of those 4 rates actually are very similar in the sense that the summer differentials are really wide and the winters are really skinny. Here's the DRSES. Here's the summer season differentials. We're looking at now through the rates table instead of the visualization tab. So again, quite a wide on-peak to off-peak and super off-peak differential. But check out the rest of the year. The rest of the year, it's in my mind, when I see this, it's not even really TOU. The difference, a super off-peak at 24.6 and an on-peak at 26.5, less than 2 cents difference, that doesn't incentivize customer behavior, in my opinion. It certainly does not provide an opportunity for storage savings. There's just nothing here to arbitrage against. And again, you got to be mindful of the fact that how are the seasons defined? Actually, it'd probably be a little bit easier to look at it this way. The DRSES, it is a 5-month summer. So 5 months of the year, that kind of lucrative wide price differential exists. The other 7, it's virtually non-existent. So something to be mindful of when you're looking at whether it's solar only or solar plus storage SDG&E projects. And by the way, all 4 of those rates I think have a very similar wide summer, skinny winter effect. So something definitely to be mindful of in the SDG&E territory. Okay, I'm going to kind of wrap up with a couple of big picture takeaway thoughts. Obviously, going back to Tracy's introductory slides in the beginning. Incredibly strong demand for residential storage in California. All the data shows that, whether it's the Wood Mackenzie Energy Storage Association report, that's a national report. Storage deployments are growing nationally, and the projections are for very strong growth going forward. I think the takeaway from that, after looking at a lot of the stuff I just presented on, is the thing that a lot of folks have been saying, and we all know, which is a lot of that growth is motivated by non-financial reasons, right? It's not really about a homeowner adding a storage system to their solar system to improve their payback or improve their rate of return, because frankly, you don't. It does not help the economics. In fact, it hurts it. The demand is coming from some of those non-financial motivators, like the backup power, like the kind of desire to be more energy independent, and yes, also hedge against future rate changes. But certainly the data shows, also the SGIP data that Tracy mentioned, really incredible if you stop and think about it. The SDG&E residential money has been gone for virtually a year now. The PG&E money, that step 5 window that just opened up on the 1st of this month, that was gone in less than 2 weeks. That shows the sort of pent-up demand. And if you compare that against where the commercial SGIP budgets are, that are kind of just hanging out in step 2 and 3, and not a ton of reservations coming in, it's just something you have to acknowledge. Very strong demand. Number 2, California has very friendly residential time of use rates for storage. Frankly, some of the most friendly ones in the country. That said, this was kind of one of my really key points of today's webinar. The really advantageous solar plus storage rate, like SCE's TOU-D-PRIME, in a lot of ways is at odds with, and it's not a particularly solar-friendly rate. What Brad at CalSA likes to call the more mild time of use rates, those are the best solar-only rates. The really sharp and frankly a little bit painful rates like TOU-D-PRIME and PG&E's EVA and EV2, those are the more the more storage-friendly rates where you can show a better economic return on the solar plus storage. And then point number 4, I probably should have put this on top just to be really clear. Definitely in all of the bottoms-up analysis that we're running, and we're going to keep running, solar only wins. Things are changing as storage installation costs continue to come down. In our model, we've been using $11,000 for I think we ran this off the LG storage system installed. We kind of go back and forth, switch between that and also running this against the Powerwall system. As costs come down, obviously that starts to shift. But today, for sure, PV only still wins in California. Storage incentives matter a lot. It's interesting. When I ran that analysis that I published, that was when SGIP was still in step 4. A lot of the analysis that I'm running now, I've been actually modeling it without SGIP. Because in SDG&E and PG&E, it's just wait list. Yes, when that new SB 700 SGIP money comes online, I think the expectation is that the incentive level will likely start at where step 5 left off. So it'd probably be more reasonable to use the step 5 residential SGIP rate when you're kind of running a lot of this comparison analysis. But just to be clear, for solar plus storage to even get close to solar only, you need a nice SGIP incentive, and you also need to be taking that 30% ITC on the storage cost. And then point number 6, just to throw one last curveball in there, and I haven't talked about it at all today, but I'll just kind of plant the seed because this will be huge. All bets are off on everything I'm talking about here when NEM 3.0 goes into effect. This is kind of more my personal opinion from reading the tea leaves on where NEM 3.0 will land, but certainly would not be at all surprised to see NEM 3.0 in California look somewhat similar to what we saw in Hawaii, where the utilities and the Utility Commission really has a final decision that just really penalizes solar exports to the grid. That's kind of the root of, you know, what we're seeing in Hawaii, what we're also seeing in Australia, where adding storage to your solar system really isn't about like, you know, running comparisons and like you run this one on the best case and run this one on the best case and kind of see how they stack up against each other. NEM 3.0 very likely will make it an absolute requirement to have storage with all solar systems if you're sizing your solar system such that it's exporting a lot of energy back to the grid. Anything close to a full offset system, you'll likely need to pair with storage just so you don't get really punished by discounted exports. So I'll just kind of throw that out there as a last point. And Tracy, I think that is all I have. If you want to take it back and run through some Q&A.
Okay, sounds good. Let me change it to myself. Okay. We did have some questions coming in. A lot of them were kind of specific to certain rate schedules and certain kind of equipment being used, but there are a couple we do want to get to. This is always asked again about this slide deck and recording being sent out. So we are going to send this out like an hour after the webinar. You should be getting it into your inbox. And I will take this one as well. Somebody asked, when are those proposed decisions expected to come down on the additional SGIP funding and the new greenhouse gas emission reduction requirement? So the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements proposed decision, actually I mentioned it earlier, but that is expected to be voted on tomorrow at a CPUC meeting. So we could know something tomorrow by the end of the week, early next week on that. And then the additional funding from SB 700 proposed decision, that is actually supposed to be voted on in a couple weeks. We don't really have a firm date on that, but it should be hopefully soon. And then this next one I have, Adam, does Energy Toolbase model storage batteries correctly in Imperial Irrigation District in California, and does battery storage make sense?
Yeah, I saw that question come in early. And yeah, the one nuance about the IID territory and also some of the other municipal utilities in California, we've seen them wanting to move to these monthly true-up, monthly NEM true-up rules. Boy, I got to tell you, just monthly NEM true-ups are not good for solar or storage. Effectively, what that means is when you finish the month, right, as a net exporter, say you just produce more solar than you use that month, and the summer happens all the time, right? Well, guess what? You don't carry forward those credits at retail and true up at the end of the year. You get trued up at the end of each month, and oftentimes the true up is it's an ugly rate. It's a wholesale rate. The answer is yes. We absolutely model that perfectly in Energy Toolbase, and it's actually really easy to set up. So you can kind of get with your account manager or myself, and we can show you that. That's the good news. The bad news is it ain't pretty. And frankly, I've been a pretty big advocate at CalSA to whenever the utilities are floating the idea of monthly NEM true-ups, we've got to push back really hard on that, because that's actually bad for both solar and storage economics.
Okay, this one, I know you just talked about it, but this one came in. If you have any timeline, let's see, as to when NEM 3.0 is expected to come online.
It's a great question. It's a huge question. I kind of don't want to speak on that. Let me get with Brad and get a latest update on that. And again, Tracy said it earlier, if you guys aren't already members of CalSA, you should be. Also, I will mention, CalSA, they have, the weekly policy committee call. I think it's Thursdays at 11:30. It's a really fantastic 1-hour call that just summarizes all the important things happening in the state. I've been on that call for the last 5+ years. That's where I get a lot of my intel. Also, CALSA hosts a storage subcommittee call. It was actually this morning. Andy Schwartz at Tesla is kind of the, I guess, chairman or leader of that call. It's a really fantastic call to summarize and wrap up a lot of the really key issues, like things we're talking about today. So if you're a CALSA member, you can actually request to get on those calls, even if you can't show up. But so in terms of NEM 3.0, that's the $20,000 question. I will have to get info from CALSA on that. I think it's we're looking at 2020, but let me try to get the timeline, and we'll reply on that.
Okay, and Adam, I'm going to throw this one to you. I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer, but on the SGIP program metrics, that step tracker, does the large-scale storage category apply to residential projects over 10 kWh?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's the delineator. I think the resi, they call it resi, but yeah, I think the minute you're over 10 kW, you're drawing. Wait a second. Let me. I might need to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure yes, you're drawing from the commercial bucket.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll check on that and get back to you to confirm. Here's one about rates. Actually, should we be modeling with final decision rates and energy tool base for PG&E, or should we use the current ETB base rates?
Great question. That's something we've talked a lot about and blogged about and held webinars on. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. Certainly, if it's a rate schedule that we know that is going to, like, say the existing rate is going to be sunsetting soon, and the new proposed rate is going into effect soon, and we know with certainty that is the case. That happened, remember, in both SDG&E and SCE, when those proposed decision rates, the later evening on peaks. The answer is yeah. I mean, my gosh, if you're presenting like 20-year analysis to your customer, and you were to do it on a rate that you know is going away in 6 months, that is not logical. That is not representative of what their reality is going to be. So there are certainly absolutely instances where you should be modeling with the proposed rate that's going into effect soon. And I get it. I know that adds complexity to your sale. I know that's one more thing that you have to explain, but that is what it is, because I think it is definitely unethical, frankly, if you know that and you're not presenting that or educating your customer on that. Is my thoughts on that.
Okay, and I'm going to throw one more at you, and then this one is, what is the battery size required to qualify for large-scale storage for SGIP, if you know that?
I'm almost certain it's 10 kW.
Okay.
So kW, right? So I mean, even if like you're thinking like LG Storage or Tesla Powerwall or any of the other leading, I don't want to kind of play favorites, any of the leading residential energy storage vendors out there in the market, I think it's quite rare that you're sizing over 10 kW for a resi project. That's different than kWh, right? Like the Powerwall, I believe is a 5 kW max charge power, 13.5 kilowatt hours. The kW power rating is what would put you into the large bucket, and I'm sure there's instances where you're going to size larger than 10 kW, but I think the vast majority of resi customers do not. You're not looking to size that big. We're trying, guys. We're trying to have storage make financial sense, even at the 5 kW, 13.5 kilowatt hour, or 5 kW, 9.8 kilowatt hour level. The minute you start sizing higher than that, your economics are not going to be pretty, I think, is my sense.
Okay. So that was, the rest of them are kind of specific to projects. If you reach out to your account manager, if you're an energy tool-based user, you can kind of go through some of these questions, get those clarified with them. But we are going to stop here. And if there's anything, if you're not an energy tool-based user and this is stuff you want to see, we do have a free trial for that you can sign up for, and you'll get an account manager and they can walk through all of these questions and about specific projects with you if you decide to sign up. So again, thank you all for joining us. We know you took time out of your day to be here, but we are grateful that you did. So If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Adam or myself, and be on the lookout for that webinar recording and the slide deck in just a little while. So have a great day, everybody.